Hello there ladies and gentlemen, Paul TX141 Walsh here, welcoming you to an all new pair of Ace in a Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the newly arrived as a patch 1.61 Kawasaki Ki-100, a Japanese fighter aircraft coming at a tier of 2 and a battle rating of 3.0. To provide you a brief historical overview as to the Ki-100 in general and this particular subvariant depicted on your screens, we begin thus. In January of 1944, Kawasaki's Ki-61 Mark II had entered production. Powered by the unreliable yet potent Ha-140 inline engine, the plane was set to become a rather promising fighter. But as time progressed, the quality of the Ha-140 production line dropped off significantly, meaning that many engines had to be rejected as a result. Needing interceptor aircraft to prevent bombing raids over Japan, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force ordered in November of 1944 that the Mitsubishi Ha-112 Mark II 1500 horsepower radial engine be used instead. Compared to its predecessor, the Ha-112 provided the same power output but was more reliable and easier to maintain, and was 54 kilograms or 119 pounds lighter. This demand for the engine switch was exaggerated on the 19th of January 1945, when a B-29 bombing raid destroyed the Akashi engine factory where the Ha-140 engines were being produced. This meant that out of the 374 Ki-61 Mark II airframes completed by the end of the month, only 99 had engines installed to them. To overcome the difficulty in installing the 4-foot diameter radial engine into the Ki-61 Mark II's 2 3/4 feet wide fuselage, the engineering team studied an imported Fokker 490 Anton where this type of problem had been solved previously. As the design was so different from its predecessor, i.e. the Ki-61, the plane was redesignated as the Ki-100 project. Starting with 3 prototypes, designated as Ki-100, the plane depicted on your screen today, the maiden flight was made on the 1st of February 1945, where it was found that due to the plane being 329 kilograms or 725 pounds lighter than the Ki-61 Mark II, due to the removal of fittings for the previous inline engine, the plane's wing loading had been reduced significantly, and this improved the plane's handling on takeoff and landing, as well as its overall manoeuvrability, including a tighter turn circle. The plane surpassed the Ki-61 in all aspects bar top speed, with its top speed at 32,810 feet or 9,950 metres being 367 miles per hour or 590 kilometres an hour, 18 miles per hour slower than the Ki-61, and this was due to the radial engine's larger surface area and hence the aerodynamic drag it induced. Armed with two 20mm Ho-5 cannon in the engine cowling and two 12.7mm Ho-103 machine guns in the wings, one to each wing, the plane entered production in February of 1945 as the Ki-100 Mark IA. The initial production run involved the conversion of the remaining 272 Ki-61 Mark II airframes to Ki-100s, concluding by June of 1945. Additional Ki-100s were then built as Ki-100 Mark IBs, starting in May of 1945. These differed from the Mark IA subvariant by featuring a revised canopy to provide the pilot with all-round vision compared to the Mark IA's Razorback style canopy. 118 Ki-100 Mark IBs were built in total. To improve the Ki-100's performance at high altitude, which was lacking especially at altitudes above 26,000 feet or 7,925 metres, the Ki-100 Mark II was proposed, which would feature a Mitsubishi 1500 horsepower Ha-112 RU engine. This was turbocharged, it was another radial engine, and would also include a water methanol injection for high altitude performance. This plane was planned to enter production on September of 1945, but only 3 prototypes had been built by the time of Japan's surrender on the 2nd of September 1945. Thereby, a total of 396 Ki-100s were produced by the war's end. In combat service, the Ki-100 proved itself as being superior to the United States' F-6F Hellcat and equal to the P-51D Mustang at low to medium altitudes. And due to its ease of handling, it was suited to the large number of inexperienced pilots Japan fielded at the end of the war. The plane was, and is today, regarded as being one of the best, if not the best, Japanese fighter of the war in the Pacific. And with our historical overview concluded, let's see how the Ki-100 handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. For our first game of today, we're on the ground strike map Fjords using the following setup. Stealth belts for all of our armament, reasoning being that in general, if we're trying to sneak up behind a foe, and we happen to miss when we open fire, They may be none the wiser to our presence because of the lack of tracer whizzing past their cockpit thanks to these belts. With regards to the machine guns in particular, these stealth belts comprise of 2 armour-piercing incendiary rounds backed up by 2 immediate action incendiary rounds, meaning that we have a very good chance of being able to set our opponents on fire with our wing-mounted machine guns, especially if we aim towards the fuel tanks. Meanwhile, in the case of our 20mm cannon, these stealth belts consist of 3 high explosive fragmentation incendiary rounds which provide us with a great deal of damage against enemy fighters in particular, but this can extend into a 2 to 3 second burst against the more heavily armed and armoured bombers to bring them down swiftly. And the single practice shell within these belts provides us with a kinetic projectile with which to shatter apart the fuselages of our opponents. As for our gun convergence, we are using a 500m gun convergence because our 20mm cannon in the engine cowling are not convergence reliant, being centerline. Meanwhile, in the case of our machine guns, we want to bring our machine guns into play at longer distances when trying to bring down those bombers with very nasty rear-facing turrets in particular, such as a PE-8. Thereby we are using our machine guns to supplement our cannon fire at a distance against bombers in particular. And as for our fuel load, we are using the standard 30-minute fuel load to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. Now we're going to begin our analysis by assessing the manoeuvrability of the Ki-100, and we're going to demonstrate this against a P-38 J-15 Lightning. We can see that they are catching us at an altitude of 4,000 metres. This should be expected. They have the higher top speed and the greater engine power. So we are going to confront them and force them to overshoot via the means of a displacement roll. Turning underneath them firstly, using our great overall turn circle here, and then barrel rolling over the top of them and initiating the displacement roll manoeuvre. We can see very quickly that the P-38 J-15 Lightning has overshot right into the path of our 20mm cannon, and having fired only 19 cannon rounds, we've been able to rip them to pieces for our first kill, taking off the right hand wingtip. So this goes to provide an example as to how powerful the 20mm cannon are, and at the same time how manoeuvrable the Ki-100 is. In its ideal speed range from 350 to 450 km an hour when you start an engagement, this plane will be at its best performance in terms of a roll rate which falls just short of the likes of the Focke-Wulf 190A and the P-47 Thunderbolt, but is comparable to the likes of a Messerschmitt 109F or G. Meanwhile, with regards to the rudder response, you have the rudder response equivalent to that of a Zero, a very powerful rudder at that. And in the case of the elevator, you have a good overall elevator which is much like the predecessor plane to this, i.e. the Ki-61, so great balance of controls. The only problem is, as we'll see a little bit later, these controls are not sustained, especially when you go to higher speeds. But, in the meantime, we progress forward up to 5,000 metres altitude. Now you may be wondering at this point, why are we just flying along casually? Well, the problem is there are 2 P-51D Mustangs over towards the northwest side of the map, harassing a B-25 on our team, and they've just taken it out. We do not want to engage these P-51s in a 2 versus 1, because it will only take a couple of armour-piercing incendiary tracer rounds from their machine guns to set us on fire. Our durability in this plane is rather poor, even though this plane does have some armour attributed to it and self-sealing fuel tanks, i.e. carrying over from the Ki-61 Mark II. As a result, we need to be very careful and try to prolong the engagement, trying to discourage the Mustangs from engaging us, and if we cannot do that, then we will have to dive away. Because the problem is, the Ki-100 is not a fast plane. With its top speed in game just being in excess of 610 km an hour, and getting to this speed will take a very long time, even with the usage of war emergency power. This means that you are going to be slower than the good number of aircraft. Now, the P-51D Mustang is right at the tip of your standard battle rating range, i.e. this plane is at a battle rating of 3.0, and the P-51D Mustang is all the way up, in the case of the D5, at 4.0. But on occasions such as this, or planes closer to your battle rating, such as the Messerschmitt 109F, you will find that a number of foes will outrun you in a straight line. Now fortunately here, as we've pressed for more and more altitude, the P-51s have become interested in other targets of opportunity on our team, and as a result now we are going to stalk them from a high altitude perch and see what they get up to. So you have to play smart but subtle in the Ki-100 in order to pick apart your foes gradually. Now at extreme altitude you may be wondering, is there an altitude limit at which the engine of your plane begins to lose its performance and the plane in general begins to lose some of its credibility? Well, 6,500 metres altitude seems to be the limit, at which point above that altitude your engine begins to lose a good portion of its performance in terms of acceleration and the plane becomes a little bit less stable, so you need to be aware of that. But predominantly most of your engagements will happen well below this altitude gap, unless you're trying to pursue the likes of a Messerschmitt 109F4, then there may be the exception, but it will not be the norm. Now here we swoop down in a gentle angle or dive against a P-51D Mustang, one of the ones from earlier, trying to take them out as their teammate has been taken out already. They are trying to zoom up towards our friendly Heinkel 111, we're not going to allow that. We get in close, line up our sights, and get ready to open fire. We take apart what was actually a D-10 very quickly, killing off their pilot as well as shattering the plane to pieces, again demonstrating how powerful the centerline cannon are on the Ki-100. We can also see how we used a gentle angle of descent towards them. Now you're probably wondering at this point, okay, does that mean that this plane at high speed and in steep dives is unstable? Well, not unstable, but uncontrollable, and this comes back to our maneuverability discussed earlier. At 500 km an hour, particularly in a steep dive, this plane will lose a good portion of its controllability. All three control surfaces are affected at this speed, whereby you will find that up to 700 km an hour all three control surfaces will begin to lock up, and at 700 km an hour this lockup will be completed. In particular, your elevator's responsiveness is dropped to 50%. Meanwhile, the rudder and your ailerons become incredibly stiff to handle, and you will only retain about 25% of their controllability. This means that the Ki-100 is not a great long-distance high-speed boom and zoomer. It can be used in a boom and zoom role as we've just depicted, over longer distances in gentle angles of dive, alternatively over short distance boom and zoom passes, i.e. when you are stalling out opponents who are trying to climb after you. But in long distance passes, as we're going to see here, or hopefully see here, this plane is not ideal for high speed boom and zoom. And we can see how, when we go above 780 km an hour in this case, the plane is very difficult to get onto target, so we're having to try and anticipate the flight path on the I-185 in this instance, and trying to guess where they're going to be, because if they make one sharp manoeuvre underneath us, much like the P-38 that we evaded earlier, we're not going to be able to get a clear shot. And the I-185 did exactly that, and straight away we decide to break over the top of them here. We do so because once our speed begins to draw away, our control surfaces become very nice to respond to very quickly. We take apart the I-185 rapidly here and snap onto a Focke 490A1 as well, picking up a double strike. We've already extended our kill catalogue to 4, we need one more for the ace in the day, and we tried to snap round on the Yak-9 here but realised they have multiple friendlies on them, we're just going to break away. It would be pointless for us to continue to pursue. They seem to have entered a 5 versus 1 engagement and they are now dispatched. Therefore we're just going to use our remnant speed from that pass, and the couple of turns we made to go after a P-61 Black Widow. And we can see how the Ki-100 does retain a good amount of its energy, although because of its lower top speed it is not going to retain speeds over 600 km an hour in level flight after you've come out of a dive very easily. But you'll find this plane will hold its speed at 500 km an hour quite nicely, but as soon as you go into a gradual climb as depicted here, now a more extended climb and more serious one, this plane will gradually lose its speed. So again, emphasising this is not the fastest plane available, and you need to be wary of that. The P-61 takes out a friendly LA-5, and at this point we break in. They seem more interested to the photo on the right, from their perspective, so we take them down for our ace in a day, as they went head to head with one of our other friendlies. We're not sure who it was, but still, we've saved a life by the looks of things, and we now make our way back towards the centre of the map. Now in terms of durability, what is rather interesting is this plane is incredibly fragile, and you may be wondering as to why we've avoided going into the furball, because of the great manoeuvrability of this plane would dictate going to the furball and achieve great success. Well, the problem is, even with the armour and the self-sealing fuel tanks of this plane, it only takes a couple of hits to set it on fire, echoing what we said earlier about the P-51D Mustangs that were potentially pursuing us. And with our two 20mm cannon rounds, we will find that our control surfaces will take some serious damage very quickly. This means we do not want to get here, and we do not want to present ourselves to multiple foes. Or if we do, we always want to be on their 6, or able to get away as quickly as possible. But if we cannot get away rapidly because of our limited top speed, this can be a problem. And with that, the game is finished. Let us take a look at the post-game stats. With our 5 kills, we're able to pick up 12,805 silver lions and 1,791 research points. Hopefully via this first gameplay then, we have demonstrated the Ki-100 in a purely fighter role, and how it is highly capable in manoeuvrability based dogfights thanks to its great manoeuvrability on all 3 control surface domains. The only planes able to beat it in this area of dogfighting would be the likes of the A6M0 and the Spitfire Mark IIB or Spitfire Mark 5B as examples. On top of this, hopefully also showed how this plane at higher speeds and in extreme dive angles is not as controllable as it is during turn fights, whereby this is not the ideal plane for boom and zoom passes at speeds in excess of 700 km an hour. Leave that to the likes of the Focke-Wulf 190s and the P-47 Thunderbolts. But at the same time, we also demonstrated the pure firepower that the 20mm cannon provide down the centreline and the 12.7mm machine guns backing this up, with the plane being able to cut apart enemy fighters very quickly. And on top of this, we also showed how the plane is consistent in its performance in terms of handling and engine power, whereby the straight line acceleration and the climb rate will stay with you all the way up to 6,500 metres altitude. Beyond this, you will lose a good portion of your performance, but for the battle rating this plane is currently set at, that should not be a problem. And we came 5th by comparison to the rest of our team, and you may note here that we have chosen to play this plane at a battle rating of 4.7. Reason being, I personally feel that the current battle rating of 3.0 is not justified, and when looking for another battle rating, rather than try to guess a battle rating appropriate to this aircraft, I thought I would just put this plane at the same battle rating as its predecessor historically, i.e. the Ki-61 Mark II. But without further ado, let us get on to our second game of today, where we demonstrate the Ki-100 in more of an interceptor / bomber hunter role. For our final game of today, we're on the ground strike map African Canyon, using the same setup as before. In order to analyse the interceptor / bomber hunter role for the Ki-100, we must start off by talking about its climb rate. As we shall see shortly, the climb rate of the Ki-100 is nothing to be laughed at. It is very good. Not the best. The best would go to the likes of the Messerschmitt 109 F4 and the P-63 A10 for the opponents it can face, as these planes are able to sustain their climbs up to altitude limits of 5,000 metres altitude, if not a little bit more. Meanwhile, in the case of the Ki-100, it does not have the ability, when it uses its more emergency power in our WEP cycle technique, in order to be able to sustain its climb for very extended periods of time. We can see that we can get roughly 1 to 2 WEP cycles out of this plane before we need to level out, build up our speed and start again. But still, this plane is able to gain over an extended climb 1,500 metres altitude approximately in a 25 to 30 degree climb angle before it needs to level out and restart. Meaning that this plane is going to be one of the first to get to 4,000 metres altitude, if not higher, and this means that you can typically get the altitude dominance advantage over your opponents, even in the case of a matchup at a battle rating of 4.7. Nonetheless, when you do need to level out, you have great straight line acceleration in this plane, another key part for an interceptor role, whereby this plane is able to accelerate from its stall speed all the way up to 400 km an hour or 450 km an hour if you add in the more emergency power, rather well. And above these limits, you will find that the acceleration begins to drag off, especially seen as you start nearing your top speed once you hit 500 km an hour and go beyond. But still, you're able to build up enough speed to be manoeuvrable enough to go into engagements and at the same time able to chase down enemy bombers. As we go into our second climb here, heading up to in excess of 5,000 metres altitude, once again echoing our sentiment about the climb rate of the Ki-100, we should unfortunately note that the majority of our team have gone for the bomber interceptor role. There are at least 5 friendlies right now, which are converging gradually on an enemy Dornier 217, off in the distance. But as we begin to rudder around here, and we can see how the rudder of this plane allows us to reverse our direction 180 degrees very easily, when we want to turn away from the centre of the map or turn back towards it, without the need to bleed out our speed by adding in a roll, a 90 degree roll, and then using the elevator. As we can see, the Dornier 217 is being pursued. A PE-8 off in the distance to our left appears, so we decide to go after them. We will be the only fighter to intercept them, and we're going to make our armament work. Now we charge in here, gradually building up our speed, adding in a gentle dive as well to build up a little bit more speed, but we can see we're converging quickly. Not as fast as other planes may, but we're doing our job here. As we make our way in, we're going to be attacking from slightly off centre on the beam towards the front of the PE-8, a weaker spot compared to the rear, and we open up with our armament. We very quickly achieve a critical hit before taking them out, but as we fly past the rear of their aircraft, their rear facing 20mm turret scratches our plane quite significantly, doing some damage to our central fuselage, meaning that when we do go to intercept enemy bombers, we need to attack them fast or as quickly as possible and break off. We do not want to come from the positions whereby they've got the greatest amount of armament to bear on us, as otherwise we're going to be ripped to pieces rapidly. And it is not a case that the engine on our aircraft will be taken out quickly, the whole airframe will be ripped apart equally. So you do not have to worry about your engine being knocked out first before everything else. The entire frame will come apart together. But as we now see an enemy Halifax, which has clearly spawned in, is gradually making their way across the battlefield, our allies are going to take it out, in particular a Messerschmitt 19G on our team, so we decide to drop a little bit of altitude into the cloud layer and then try to go for a boom and zoom roll. A temporal one at that, but still trying to pick off some foes who are unaware and maybe climbing up into the clouds, as there is a significant cloud layer in this match. Unfortunately, a good number of our allies are still staying up at altitude in order to take down enemy bombers and provide cover for our friendly bombers who may be making their way across. But we dive down our P-63A10 King Cobra here, and as we break our way down, we get a nice pass on them here, opening fire, but unfortunately, due to the lack of controllability at such speed, we cannot get an accurate shot on target, and as they start to jink about, we cannot follow. So we need to break off, making sure not to make too exaggerated a manoeuvre, as we have dropped right near the enemy spawn point, where enemy fighters will be coming out with some speed, and we try to converge on an enemy Messerschmitt 19F4. But we cannot depress our nose enough to actually get an accurate shot, so instead we just had to make our way forward in a straight line and break away from the centre of the map. To turn would have been suicide, as we would have ended up in a many versus one engagement. Now, making our way after an SM-79 off in the distance here, we can see how we are holding a good chunk of our energy from that dive in straight line performance. Our speed is gradually dropping, but not at a huge rate, so we can get away from a potential furball. The SM-79 unfortunately falls to friendly anti-aircraft batteries, and we now go for a little bit of altitude. So it's quite interesting to see how, despite our lack of controllability in a high-speed dive, we retain a good amount of energy to get out of the fray, rather than get caught up in it. As we now go into a half hammerhead before cancelling it out and leveling our plane out, we notice that the enemy P-63 from earlier is heading in towards our ground targets, but as we turn around here we hear the engine noise of a friendly F4U-1C Corsair and P-400 charging in to attack the King Cobra. It would not be worth us converging to make it a 3 versus 1. Our two allies will be able to do the job, although it appears as though our Corsair has smashed into the ground and our P-400 is going to finish the business. We make our way a little bit more towards altitude, once again echoing our sentiment about the climb rate of the Ki-100 and how we can quickly reset our position up high in the sky. As we continue to make our way towards altitude, notice how we have very few targets of opportunity here, and this is a potential frustration you may experience in this plane, whereby due to its limited durability and the fact you cannot just throw this plane into an engagement into the midst of a furball, or if you do decide to, you are playing to a significant risk factor. When your opponents are all clustered up together, and indeed your opponents are trying to bait you onto their allies, such as the Firefly here who is turning away now, it can feel as though you're a little bit withdrawn from the fight, especially when your team are predominantly up at high altitude, meanwhile the enemy team is down at lower altitude, so you need to try and keep your eyes open for potential opportunities, and really you cannot always force opportunities to appear. Though, as we dodge the flak here, we see an enemy Messerschmitt 19 Emil climbing up towards us, and we're going to use our great stalling characteristics here in order to cause them to stall out. But unfortunately we will not be able to dive down and take them out via a split S, as we've stalled them out for a friendly Focke-Wulf 190 Anton to do the job instead. As they break down here, they dispatch the Messerschmitt 19 with ease, and this means that you can use the Ki-100 in a squad-based role to take out enemy planes by forcing them to stall out. You have the stalling characteristics to do so. And as you head to stall out at 100 km an hour, the stall recovery for the Ki-100 is very pleasant. This plane will quickly recover and does not lose too much altitude before it levels out once more. Now in the meantime, an enemy P-51 Mustang, the A variant, has decided to head off towards the edge of the map. They may be going for our ground units, they may be trying to entice someone into a 1 versus 1. We're not sure here, but we are going to pursue, trying to intercept an enemy fighter down low and with speed. Now here, as we make our way down, we're going to see two key things. First is we go to pursue the P-51, how our limited acceleration in the dive, which is comparable to that of the P-51, means that we are only going to catch them gradually as they clock onto our presence. See how we're gradually equaling out our dive rates here, and this can be a bit of an issue, but nonetheless we continue to catch them, and being in a superior altitude position and they have now hit ground level, we will catch them as a result. But at the same time, here's the most important factor. As the P-51 turns this into a turn fight by looping towards us, notice how much energy we conserve in our manoeuvres, as the P-51 tries to make us go over the top of them in a straight line to open up their 20mm cannon, but we were ready to anticipate that. So we've broken over the top of them here via the usage of a vertical spiral turn. We continue to pursue, diving after them once again, trying to make them turn and fire. We know that if this engagement goes on via dives, eventually we will not catch the P-51, or we'll just keep at the same distance from them, but now we go into a full turn fight. But again, we cut our engine power completely here because we are overshooting. We now bring our engine back alive once they've lost a good portion of energy and are having to dive once again, and with some accurate fire we finally take them out. So you need to be wary of the fact that this plane, despite its very high manoeuvrability, especially within its ideal speed threshold, will carry a lot of its energy when coming out of the midst of a dive and going into a turn fight, and this can very quickly be twisted by your opponents into forcing you to overshoot right into their armament, and we almost experienced it there, much like in the first game when we forced the P-38J Lightning to overshoot into our armament. So, your strengths can be used against you as your weaknesses, but nonetheless, having taken out that P-51 and now levelling out, we go for a reload. And we should talk about the ammunition capacity of the Ki-100 at this point, and realise that the ammunition capacity is very nice. Now this is for two reasons. Firstly, with 500 rounds in total for your machine guns, 250 per gun, and the same being echoed onto your cannon, you have a lot of ammunition to spare. On top of this, due to the higher fire rate of your machine guns versus your cannon, you will run out of machine gun ammunition with approximately 70 cannon round left. Now this means that your cannon are going to last a long period of time, and you should not be afraid to open up the trigger for extended periods of time on your cannon. The machine guns are there to substantialise your cannon, not to act as the main armament, and therefore you can take down a lot of foes with your cannon before having to go for a reload. But on top of this, also consider that the muzzle velocities of your two sets of armament are rather similar. The muzzle velocity of your machine guns is only 60 meters per second higher than that of your cannon, whereby your cannon fire with a muzzle velocity of 702 meters per second versus the 760 meters per second on your machine gun. So the lead indicator is roughly the same for both sets of armament, with the machine guns requiring a little bit less lead, but it's not too noticeable. We're getting ready to snap out of the way of a Yak 3 there, as we make our way towards the LA7, who's been pursued by a Messerschmitt 19 G2 friendly, and we split S here and catched him during the split S to pick up another kill, before cutting over the top of potentially a foe on our 6, but actually it is a dead foe from earlier, not the LA7 but another, and we snap onto the rear of the Yak 3 here to assist our P-36G Hawk in dispatching them for our 4th kill. And here we're essentially flitting through the middle of a furball that is gradually coming to its end, or was gradually coming to its end we should say in the past tense, and helping our allies finish up the remaining foes. And that is something the Ki-100 can do very well. Come into a furball that is gradually begin to end, and help out dispatch a number of foes in a very short period of time, thanks to the potency of its armament and the large ammunition capacity available. We can see a chain of foes here chasing after our friendly P-47. We decide to latch onto a Black Widow, in particular here rather than the Spitfire, and we open up, very quickly achieving a critical hit and taking out the tail control of the P-61, causing them to go down for our ace in a day. At this point we break away once more, noticing the Spitfire entering a furball against many of our allies, and we decide simply to break away. In doing so, this means we can avoid getting tangled up in an engagement where multiple friendlies may crash into us or hit us by accident, and we're just going to linger on the fringes of the map, waiting for the next foe to come by. It may be the enemy bowfighter, or it may be that F4U Corsair, who is leading the way towards our ground units. We are going to pick on that Corsair if they continue on their estimated path, i.e. heading for our tanks and APCs. We go for another reload here, not because we have to, but we have the time to do so, although reloads when you have half your ammunition available are not essential, they're just a nice to have, so you do not need to worry too much about that. And we now begin to dive on the Corsair, who is heading on the path that we anticipated, and they're going to break underneath us to make a continued pass against our ground units, and we are going to dive down on them and intercept. Excuse me. As we dive down here and they take out one of our medium tanks, they cut underneath us at this point. We're getting ready to snap up and out the way in case they tried to go vertical for a head-on, and we latch onto the 6. We cut our throttle initially to manage our energy here, being aware of the mistakes we could have made against the P-51, and we get right in close here, using our maneuverability in order to get right in behind, cut off their right hand wingtip, and pick up our 6th and final kill for this match. We notice an I-185 directly above us and we decide to go dead vertical here, as it is safe to do so, making sure that no threats nearby can hit us, but the I-185 is gradually getting away at this point, and as they begin to come into range here we cannot get a clean shot off on them as they're zigzagging left to right, and our allies take them out instead, although after they've been taken out we can see that some of our rounds did hit. Not to worry, we come around once more towards the centre of the map here, looking around for any other threats. As we begin to level out here, we notice a Spitfire in the distance, but the game has now ended, and it is time for us to once again take a look at the post-game stats. With our 6 kills, we're able to pick up 22,980 silver lions and 2,776 research points. To defeat the Ki-100 in a given matchup then, I can recommend one particular approach which will exploit its 3 core weaknesses, i.e. its lack of controllability at extreme speeds in excess of 700 km/h in particular, secondly, its lack of overall acceleration in a high speed, high angle dive, and thirdly, its ability to retain a huge chunk of energy when coming out of a high speed dive. The approach then, so long as you spot the Ki-100 from afar, is to lure it into following you into a high speed, high angle dive, at which point your plane will most likely be able to accelerate with, if not out accelerate the Ki-100, and as your speeds hit 700 km/h plus, you need to turn to engage them via the midst of a turn fight, whereby, using a loop or a sharp turn underneath them, it is very likely that the Ki-100 will overshoot, and in the process, cut across your line of fire, and you need to be ready for this, as you only need to hit the target once to most likely take it down or severely compromise its control surfaces. And then the Ki-100, if they have not been dispatched already, will need to break away, alternatively will be a sitting duck for you. But if you miss and the speed of the engagement drops down to its ideal speed range, the Ki-100 pilot will be able to use their maneuverability to come around, get onto your 6 and cut you apart. But by avoiding being lured into such a situation where we cross the line of fire from our opponents in this second match, we're able to come 5th by comparison with the rest of our team, whereby we employed the Ki-100 in a bomber-hunter role at the start, in particular on a P8, and then extended it into an interceptor role to go after a number of fighter-based foes. In conclusion then, with its great overall manoeuvrability, which is a step up from its predecessor, the Ki-61, and it should be noted that the turn circle of the Ki-100 in-game is slightly tighter than that of its predecessor, potent armament, and powerful engine both in terms of straight line performance and climb rate performance, the Ki-100 proves itself as a formidable fighter suited to 1 vs 1 engagements, and one that can also double up as a bomber hunter when and where appropriate, so long as you are mindful of its limited durability. And it is for these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, that I think we can appreciate why many would call it Japan's finest. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care, and good luck in the skies.